this being the week where Star Wars turns 40, I thought I would go way back and review the only two non-Star Wars films that George Lucas ever directed. The very first feature-length film that George Lucas ever directed was THX 1138 from 1971. THX 1138 is what I would suppose is George Lucas's attempt to emulate Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's about a totalitarian future where everybody has lost free will, sex and love are forbidden, and to make sure no one ever questions authority, all the citizens are given mind-altering drugs on a regular basis. The main character, whose name is the title, is a factory worker named THX 1138, played by at the time, young Robert Duvall. And THX's roommate, a woman named LUH, has somehow managed to break free of her mind-altering drugs and works to get THX off of the pills as well. And for the first time in either of their lives, they have sex and fall in love. But the system, which keeps a close eye on everybody, just is not going to allow it. So the film becomes about THX trying to escape and taking anybody who's willing to go along for the ride and go beyond the outer walls of the city that they are enclosed in. It's a very trippy movie, it's hard to know what to make of it, and it is just magnificently shot. It's very late 60s, early 70s looking, as well as its interpretation of what they thought the future would look like. But that's what makes it cool, and the film's sound design, which I think was a little revolutionary at the time, really tried new things and tried to base a movie around something other than just plot and characters. And the film has an extremely haunting score. Overall, it's a great sci-fi action thriller and directed by George Lucas, as well as co-written by Lucas and Walter Murch. It's definitely worth a watch just out of curiosity, and I want to make it clear, the version I'm reviewing is the 1970s version, which is out of print and can only be bought on VHS. So if you got $50 and a VCR player to spare, I say check it out. If not, you can always settle for the 2004 Director's Cut DVD. Not gonna say anything too negative, but just like the Star Wars movies, George Lucas gave THX 1138 the special edition treatment, and like the original Star Wars movies, it just doesn't seem as special anymore. The second movie, and the only non-sci-fi film George Lucas has ever directed, American Graffiti from 1973. American Graffiti is definitely a movie you never would have expected from George Lucas. It's a callback to the 1960s and what it meant to be a teenager in that decade, showing how it was the age of early rock and roll, fast cars, and trying to pick up chicks. American Graffiti is definitely a classic of the 70s, and even though it takes place in the 60s and has a lot of the 60s look and themes to it, I feel it's a movie that is very relatable for anyone who's in their teens, graduating high school, or trying to figure out what they're going to do after high school. It's a comedy, but it's also got some very real, relatable themes to it. And it has a great cast of some people who are well known today, were big in the 80s, or went on to different career ventures, including pre-Happy Days and pre-directing days, Ron Howard. Pre-Jaws, pre-Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Richard Dreyfuss. Pre-Melvin and Howard, and way before the first Puppet Master movie, Paul Le Mat. And pre-The Untouchables, Charles Martin Smith. There's also a very early appearance by a young Harrison Ford playing, I guess, the hot rod driving bully of the movie. And the film's soundtrack is well acclaimed, including having a special appearance by 1960s disc jockey Wolfman Jack. American Graffiti is a good film for anybody looking for an old school classic teen movie. And for anyone who grew up in the 1960s or lived through the 1960s, this film will probably bring back a lot of nice nostalgia. Directed by George Lucas, produced by Francis Ford Coppola, and co-written by Lucas, William Huyck, and Gloria Katz, Lucas's future collaborators on Howard the Duck. All four of them received Oscar nominations for their work here. And there's not much else to say. I totally recommend American Graffiti. It's probably going to be the easier to find of these pre-Star Wars age George Lucas films. Hey, before he lost the ability to write and direct, George Lucas could actually make some decent films. If you have somehow been lucky enough to see the original, non-director's cut version of THX 1138, as well as seen American Graffiti, leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I'm always interested to hear what people think of the movies I've reviewed.